I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's words. I vow to taste it. I vow to see it with my ears and hear it with my eyes. I vow to feel it. I vow to embody it. It's like, what is this truth? It's right here. It's as close as your taste buds. So we're last week, this week, and next week entering koans through Joan Sutherland, through Forests of Every Color. And then in April, Sangha members will be picking up koans through the Hidden Lamp. On Thursday began, she presents 4 ways of looking at a koan. Did 2, and I said we'd do 2 more today, and I'll do a little review. But it seems to me really important to say, this is 4 ways of looking at a koan. I mean, there are koans that are passed down to us. And there's a power to them when you know that they've been passed and passed and passed, and different people have digested them and tasted them and let them enter their body and transform them in their relationships. But let us never forget that our life is a koan. This is about waking up in this very life and in this very body. Life doesn't always seem like a koan. It can seem impossible. It can seem boring. It can seem, I don't know. Somehow calling life a koan, it's alive. Every single moment, and moments within moments. So what are 4 different ways of entering this life, this very particular life, this very particular moment, to crack us open, to wake us up to that it's just this. It is just this moment, and that this moment includes all moments, and that it is full of wonder and sorrow and grace and anger and confusion. That the whole world is Buddha's body. The whole world is Buddha's heart. The whole world is the one heart of the world trying to wake us up to the truth. So I just wanted to make sure we didn't think we were studying something abstract and old here. So Joan Sutherland says there's 4 ways of looking at a koan. We could say 4 ways of looking at or entering the aliveness of life. We covered on Thursday, but I'll just do a little review, is one she calls golden moments. The air and the earth penetrated in the warm gusts of spring. The soil was full of sunlight, and the sunlight full of red dust. The air one breathed was saturated with earthy smells, and the grass underfoot had a reflection of the blue sky in it. Koans, life, opens us to wonder, to beauty, to moments of being cracked open by joy, the simple penetration of a sunlight ray, piercing, or a raindrop. So these ancient stories are nothing about something out there. They're about can the raindrop or a falling snowflake, for those of you wherever you are or whatever, can it break your heart? The wonder of it. Commentary, she puts, his beauty stops us in our tracks. Thoughts and feelings that have been flowing in one direction, and when they resume, they're traveling in a completely different trajectory. The moment when a koan, or our life, just falls open before us. It's number one. Number two, she calls born in fire. Not of being free of the world, but free in the world. That acknowledges that this is a world that there is suffering. There is suffering. There is suffering. There's a cause of suffering. There's the possibility of awakening from suffering. And there's a path. And that it's all inclusive. Don't leave anything out. Shitao of Sandokai says, whatever meets your eye is the way. This true self you're looking for is not just here in your own heart mind, but everywhere. And everything you see is Buddha nature. Everything you see is you. And in the time that he lived, it included ruined towns, blighted fields, refugees starving by the roadside. I don't think it's easy. It's not so difficult, to translate into this time. This is all me. This is all you. How close can we let it come? Can we let it break us open and break our hearts? I love what she says here. Practice. Koan practice, living practice, Zazen practice is about making us fetchable. Isn't that great? Hazel, did you hear that? Fetchable. It helps us recognize what gets in the way of our being fetched, and then it gives us a method to deconstruct the obstacles, to help us wake up, to be touched by the world, and to be responsive to the world. That's these ancient koans. That's the intention. Okay, now we're on to the third, which she calls the Great Sutra. And here's a quote that I really like by Terry Tempest Williams. Give me one wild word to follow. Can you find a wild word to follow? My guess is wild words have been following you and waking you up, or you wouldn't be here. Koans. The medium is language. The sound of a raindrop, the taste. But koans, the traditional koans, are language. But Zen is often known as scriptures outside, I'm going to get this right, transmission outside the scriptures. It's like, don't look for it in words. Don't get caught or bound up in words. It's direct and immediate experience, but Dogen said, wait a minute. If you put words outside of it, what else are you putting outside of this? You can't put words or language outside of this. And then Joan tells us, the people who originally said that transmission is outside the scriptures were people who were deeply literate, well-read and writing all the time, who were very intent on understanding and intent on communicating. But what they were trying to communicate through words, to find turning words, was what they called the reality of the Great Sutra. That the whole world is singing the Dharma. The whole world is teaching the Sutra. And they distinguished between living and dead words. Now this is very close to my heart, because I felt like I grew up somewhere where all the words were dead. I always felt like nobody was telling the truth. And it wasn't because they were bad people, it's just nobody knew what it was to begin with or how to express it. But I always had the feeling it was expressible, because you could tell. You could tell, like when you would, like when I was hearing Martin Luther King, I knew his words were alive. That there were and are people when they speak, when they spoke, my whole body could feel it. I think, so what is that? So what is this language? Dead words have been turned into abstract objects held at a distance, accumulated and repeated rather than lived. If they encourage anything, it is to carry on with the habitual. I would encourage us all to look, to smell, to notice when we're speaking dead words. I think gossip is often dead words. When we're trying to do something, we're trying to connect. But do the words feel alive? Notice the words in your own head. Are there alive words happening that are creative and turning and have possibility and imagination? Or is it the same old story? I mean, slightly different, but I know those. I know that in my own head. You could just take a breath and say, thank you very much. But this doesn't feel particularly alive right now. Living words are an essential part of the moment in which they arise, as glistening with vitality as a tree after rain. They have the power to change our minds. They have the power to heal. Awakening isn't dependent on words, but neither is it independent of them, which makes words the same as everything else. This world, its speech, its silence, is the field of our awakening. It's all alive, and it happens through us. Any being, event, or object might call forth awakening in us, and thus the whole world. And when that happens, such language is called turning words. It's like a turning phrase. And there are turning phrases in the koans and in the formal, particular koans. But I also, I think I had the experience this morning in a meeting I was in, where suddenly somebody says something that you just feel like nobody's ever said before. I mean, it's very ordinary, but you can just feel something in your body and your cells and your brain. I mean, for me, the experience is sort of like, it's like a key in a lock, and it just goes clunk, clunk. And there's a moment of insight. Something lines up and it's opened, and it happens in relationship. Because you can't do turning words into, I mean, it has to happen between people, but it also could happen between you and a rock. A rock could say something to you in rock language and turn the whole world. Words that turn our perspective just a degree or two, which makes all the difference. A bit of sutra floating across The path, the cry of a bird at dawn, the response to a question coming at just the right moment, all equally illuminated, all equally capable of illuminating. Koans. Reflect in the moment, the nonlinear, the paradoxical, are full of surprising associations and insights, deep and wide beyond measure, incommunicable in the ordinary ways. They are precisely accurate, a language that is native to the moment and to the place, and bring us back to this life, alive and that's already in progress. What's a dead word and what's an alive word? What's a dead thought and what's an alive thought? What's the difference between habitual thought and thought that arises out of silence? Okay, number 4. She calls the one who asks. The fourth way of looking at a koan, or the fourth way I would say of looking at or entering life. We set out with lives shaped like wondering. In the beginning, we're looking, perhaps, for some kind of answer, an answer to the shared question about life and death and meaning, or to the question uniquely formed within our own lives, the thing that aches on some days and causes us sudden pain on others, something heavy with a sharp edge that we're carrying next to our skin. We all carry those questions. They arise in one way or another when we're a child. Just thinking for me is I couldn't articulate it, but it's what, from Ohio, I got in a car and drove to San Francisco Zen Center in pursuit of a question. It's like, what is it? And what are we doing? And what is this life about? But it also gets us out of bed every day on the deepest levels. What are we doing here? Eventually, perhaps, we lay those questions down in hope or desperation on a particular doorstep, and we're met not by an answer, but by another question. And perhaps we pick up the new question, it comes with a simple tag. Here's another way to ask your question, a way people have been asking your question for a long time. The question gets deeper. Keep company with it, and you'll soon notice it emits a soft glow in whose light your questions look different. The questions you carry with you look like a pilgrimage. The question you've been given starts to look like shelter. Stay with the deep questions. They can turn into dead questions that are full of a life at the center of them. Stay with the questions. What is it? Okay, so here's a story that she tells, and I like this story, and I'm going to share it, and then I'll ask you about it too. A long time ago, a young Japanese woman is lost in mourning after the death of her husband. She leaves everything behind and goes to a monastery in search of help, and she asks, what is Zen? In other words, what does Zen have to say about my sorrow? Her immigrant Chinese teacher replies that the heart-mind of the one who asks is Zen. The one who asks the question is Zen. Her broken heart is the Buddha of that time and place, and somehow she knows it's a true word, and she stays to find out what that means. I remember coming from Ohio and coming down the road to Green Gulch, and I was scared and young and alone, and I remember parking the car and walking up. They were building the Wheelwright Center at that time, And I remember all the there was a whole crew of Zen Center carpenters that were all sitting on a bench having their lunch break. And there was a way that they were doing it. I thought, this is an answer to the question. I don't know what it is, but I'm going to stay. It's like you just don't know where the answers are going to come from. Or you walk into the garden, I ended up in the garden in the field. This is the answer to the question. I'm going to stay with this forever. What is this? So she decides to stay and find out what that means. And sitting in the dark, the woman runs her fingers over the face of the Buddha of grief, learning its contours. Now, she lost her husband, but I would like to pose here that we are all, and at the heart of our question, we are all carrying an enormous grief and sorrow that comes with this birth, death, life. And maybe you've lost a child, or you've lost a partner, or you've just looked and studied life enough to know there's sorrow and change and impermanence, and you have no control over it. We run our hands over the face of the Buddha, and the Buddha reaches back. And for her, over time, she discovers a kind of grace in that dark, with grief as her companion. A deep humility, a deep stillness, a deep listening. In its Latin roots, grief is related to being pregnant. We're all pregnant with grief and life. And you can't have spring without winter. It's all completely, you can't tease it apart. She says, grief is a Buddha. Joy is a Buddha. Anger is a Buddha. Peace is a Buddha. In the koans, in this life, we're meant to become intimate with all the Buddhas, to climb into them, to let them climb into us, to burn them from warmth, make love with them, kill them, sit down with the one sitting in the center of the house. You're not meant to cure the grief, Buddha, nor it you. You're meant to find out what it is to be part of a season of your heart-mind, a season in the world that has been stained and dyed by grief and made holy by grief. One day, the woman hears the cry of a deer from a nearby stream. Where is the deer? The teacher asks. She listens, concentrated, ripe with listening. Who is listening? And something ripe in her bursts open. The deer's cry echoes through the trees and rises simultaneously from her own scarred heart. She is there, cloven hoofs wet, and she is here wondering, and everything is listening to everything else. You stay with the question, and it opens. There are just moments of opening. Later, she is at the stream with a lacquer bucket meant for flowers, only she fills it with water. She sees the moon's reflection in the water, and her grief is radiant. Still later, she says, the bottom falls out of her bucket. Light and water soaking into the earth, all that wet, the stream, the watery moon in a bucket, the deer's moist eyes, the woman weeping. To not turn away from the one heart of the world. The bodhicitta that arises, that is the heart of compassion, is the deep heart of sorrow. Don't turn away. The golden moments and the moments of joy and beauty and the moments of grief are completely interpenetrated. And a true word will not come from any place but just this. And then Joan Sutherland goes on to tell us that the woman who's in the story, whose name is Mujaku, became the abbess of Tokaji Convent in Japan, and became and established a place of refuge for women of that time and for many, many generations who were trying to escape abusive relationships. That out of her own sorrow, she was able to be of service to others. Her cry for help, the cry of the deer, moonlight pouring from a broken bucket, her grief spread further than the edges of her skin belonged to more than her particular heart, and so did her awakening. As she was held, so could she hold, and that is what awakening is. I think grief is highly underrated in our culture. Big grief, but I just remembered a story of Suzuki Roshi, that he would go into the grocery store, and as I remember, I mean the markets of Japan, and as I remember, he would drive his wife crazy because he would go in and he would feel sorry for all the sad vegetables that weren't being taken home. And so he'd bring home all these sad little vegetables because one could say he was grieving for them because all the good ones were being picked. You know, this doesn't have to be something big. I think there's a beautiful tenderness, an open-heartedness. How in the world are we going to respond to what's happening on our planet if we can't feel and grieve and see it in the smallest details? How in the world are we going to respond to war and create peace in our own hearts and minds if we can't see and grieve and feel remorse for our own when we hurt people, and to feel when we're hurt, so that our hearts can get bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's all these old stories are. So please just show up and in relationship and see what happens next. So here's my question to you. Go in small groups into relationship with yourself, because you always have time in the beginning just to explore what's inside of you in any of this. Please follow whatever arises. And as others are listening, you're going to touch them and they're going to touch you.